Um, you know, starting off kind of like frame of thought, again, like when we talked about like our production or our growing area versus like our buffer space, your buffer space is more than enough to have a great effect on the ecosystem. So again, any land or any footprint of land that you can't use or are not using for your production or for your veggies or your grains or whatever can go to what we call a beneficial habitat. And so the best way to keep those going without like breaking your back and spending all of your money is to put in native perennial flowers. And if you could find ones that are really early blooming or really late blooming, that's going to have the best impact and benefit on your pollinators because the mid-season is already covered. Everything grows in June, July, August. There's nothing that you necessarily need to put into the world that isn't already there doing its work for the pollinators.
Staten Islander News is here today with Dan Kemper. Dan Kemper is a master trainer at Rodale Institute and a former farmer training program manager and farm manager also at Rodale Institute. He studied biology at Kutztown University of Pennsylvania. He has been working with the Rodale Institute for 12 years and specializes in organic and regenerative agriculture. We will be asking questions and discussing topics related to regenerative and organic agriculture that are tailored to small farms and container gardening, such as Staten Islanders might be more familiar with. So, readers who watched any of the Kiss the Ground trilogy and Groundswell trilogy films will recognize the name of Rodale Institute, who featured prominently in these films as they have been pioneering organic, sustainable, and regenerative agricultural practices for decades, with a strong commitment to improving the food delivery system in the U.S. and worldwide to prevent desertification, ecosystem destruction, and other issues related to conventional methods of agricultural production. These issues are extremely important since desertification means less cropland available for food production, and the long term consequences can be devastating for local populations that have experienced this. The Dust Bowl in the 1930s is an example of this desertification and subsequent mass migration. This was compounded by, and in many cases caused by, the already in progress Great Depression, which caused farmers to overcultivate to increase their income with concomitant chemicals and lack of rotation, leading to black blizzards where the topsoil blew away in giant clouds. This led to the planting of the Great Plains Shelter Belt, also known as the Prairie States Forestry Project. It is often referred to historically as America's Great Wall of Trees and runs from North Dakota to Texas, and it contributed to the alleviation of the Dust Bowl. Some of the shelter belt is still intact. Rodale Institute is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to growing the regenerative organic agriculture movement through rigorous research, farmer training, and education. Their groundbreaking science and direct farmer support programs serve as a catalyst for change in farming and food production worldwide. Over their 75-year history, they've proven that organic farming is not only viable, but it's essential to humanity's survival. So, good afternoon, Dan. It's good to have you with us.
And you as well. Thank you for having me.
So, if you could talk about first, what is regenerative agriculture and how is it different from or the same to organic agriculture?
Well, great question. Thank you. So, regenerative agriculture is basically, without the word organic in there, it can be kind of used in any way that people want to. So, what we really focus on is regenerative organic agriculture. But the idea overall, and most people accept for regenerative agriculture, is that you're putting back into the system. So, farming is extractive. We use soil nutrients to create product or food for people. And so, if that's being removed from the soil, something has to go back in. So regenerative would mean that you're putting more back in, or you're doing more for the soil than you're taking back out of it, basically.
Okay. And I know that there's like five principles, so like no-tilling. What else would consist of regenerative agriculture that would make it different from conventional agriculture?
That's a great question. So this is kind of more into like the difference between regenerative ag and regenerative organic ag. So regenerative agriculture doesn't necessarily have specific rules and regulations behind it. There's not necessarily an auditing process like there is for organic. Regenerative organic is going to be the next level above organic where there is an auditing process, there are specific rules. So in regenerative organic agriculture, we're really focusing on the soil health, we're focusing on animal health and welfare, and then human laborer welfare as well. So it's the three big pillars that we're really focusing on for that movement. We do try to stress reduce tillage, making sure that soil is looked at as an actual living thing, not necessarily just a medium that we crank nutrients in and out of. Similar to livestock and labor and humans. So looking at them as actual uh, organisms, as actual people in the field, not treating them like numbers, looking out for their best welfare, making sure they're getting everything that they need. So it's a whole system that works together and can feed the world in that way.
Okay, cool. So, and the one of the reasons for no tilling is because when you till and you over till, that actually leads to that erosion. Whereas what you guys do is you try to, now what do you do instead of tilling? Like, because you have a bunch of weeds on your
Mm-hmm.
plot of land, and you can't just plant just right into the weeds, or they'll just choke them out. So, what do you guys do instead of tilling to start a plot of land?
So there are a few things that we do alternatively to tilling, but in our organic systems, we actually still use tillage quite a bit. So if we're going to avoid tillage, it'll be kind of on a specific rotation using cover crops and a specific timing so that we can avoid certain tillage events. But what's interesting is that a lot of conventional agriculture, people who will spray herbicides and Roundup and whatnot, have started using the term regenerative and no-till because they're saying that they're trapping the carbon in the soil, which is true. So once you till the soil, technically what happens is that CO2 that was built up in that soil that feeds the microbes is released in a gaseous form. And so what we do here at Rodale is we make sure that, again, what's going into the soil is more than what's coming out in every way. So not just with harvesting and nutrients, but also with tillage. So what we've kind of resorted to are different depths of tillage or different intensities of tillage. And then if we wanted to avoid tillage altogether, we will use either a roller crimping system on a larger scale for kind of corn and beans, larger crops. And then on a smaller scale for market gardening or for veggies, we'll use big tarps. And those basically are big silage tarps, thick, heavy plastic, and you lay it out over the ground for a few weeks, if not a few months. And that lets all of the worms and microbes and bugs all come to the surface and start eating and decomposing all of the residue on top. So after a few weeks, depending on the weather and the moisture, when you pull that tarp back off, the soil looks like it's been freshly tilled, like it's ready to go, like nature did the tillage for you. So that's kind of a smaller scale thing, but those are two alternatives to tillage that we've been working with the most.
Okay, awesome. And one of the things that they had talked about a little bit in the movies and the films was something called drawdown, which is where because you don't till, can you kind of describe what that might look like, what the drawdown concept is?
Yeah, I believe that's referring to carbon and carbon sequestration. And so the idea is that greenhouse gases in the air, a lot of CO2, it's made from carbon. And that's actually what the plants use for their actual food. They absorb that, they turn that into their own sugars. So carbon sequestration in agriculture looks like growing plants that are going to take carbon from the air, turn it into plant form, and then ultimately die and decay into the soil, leaving carbon in the soil where it's going to stay for a while. So when we till, we're releasing some carbon, but when we apply compost or manure, when we grow a cover crop, when we do perennialization or a pasture, taking things out of a tillage rotation, it's helping that soil continue to absorb more carbon. And there's little cities underground called aggregates that are really storing that and processing it. So when we till, we destroy them. And so it's best to try to avoid it. But just like you talked about, there's a fine balance between, our number one best, untouched ground versus something that's going to give us the production we need to feed people and feed our communities. So we found like a good balance is actually doing a very shallow tillage. So if anyone, or if you're familiar with market gardening, kind of like a permanent bed system used with a two-wheel tractor, people will kind of scratch up just the surface, getting it ready for a seed bed or planting. So I've taken that smaller scale idea and applied it to tractors on a much, much larger scale. So at the moment, I'm managing only about 7 acres for my program. But when I was farm manager, managing all 300 acres, we were only having to do a deep tillage for like a potato crop, and every other crop didn't have to go deeper than a 2-inch tillage. So when we think about carbon sequestration, a normal tillage is going to be 6 to 8, even 10 inches deep, and that's going to release a certain amount of carbon into the air. If we reduce that to only 2 inches, then it's a fraction of what the expected carbon release is. On top of that, if we're tilling in 20 tons per acre of compost, then we're really continuing to regenerate the soil rather than extract from it.
Okay, awesome. And yeah, something else that they had said is that all of those carbon credits and ways that people want to reduce carbon, this lower tillage and regenerative agriculture is actually one of the best ways to sequester that carbon from I mean, it's not really pollution so much as like emissions and stuff like that. 'Cause pollution's like a different thing, although it might actually help with pollution too, I'm not sure.
Mhm.
But so you know what I'm talking about, like the concept where it's better it's better than any of the carbon sequestration uh, methods that they have outside of that.
Yeah, so the number one thing you can do for your soil is put it into like basically a perennial system or a perennial state. So that doesn't mean just kind of like letting it go and not doing anything. It's planting a good crop that can live there for years and years and build the soil along the way. It has to be a crop that's also like logistically manageable. So um, people will plant trees, which are a great way to sequester carbon because they hold all of that for just years, if not decades, in their wood form. But trees aren't always, if someone has like a solar field or like a house nearby, you can't just put trees wherever you want. So we talk about like a perennial pasture system with like clover, ryegrass, fescue, crops that can kind of reseed and repopulate themselves for just years and years and years without too much management needs. So that's kind of a good way to, I guess, agriculturally to sequester carbon is to perennialize a system, and then you have to choose what's logistically viable based on that.
So that actually sounds really great. And so how can these concepts be applied to a home gardener who maybe has containers or patios on their porch and other small spaces, like maybe a 3 foot by 3 foot bed, and that's all they have because they're in an apartment and they have a
Mhm.
little spot in the backyard? So what would replace like the roller crimper or the big tarps to create mulch from ground cover? And what kind of ground cover would work well in containers as opposed to in the ground? And do
Mhm.
you recommend that people have a worm bin, compost pile, peat moss mixed with compost for potting soil, et cetera? And kind of how do they apply these principles to a very small scale operation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do get that question quite a bit. What I usually get people to kind of look through the lens of like a whole property technique or application of like a beneficial habitat. So not necessarily like what do I put at the exact base of this tomato to make like the butterflies better. It's really like not spraying and not disturbing like buffer space. If you have any like woodland or brush connected, like leaving that completely untouched. Because basically the way that it works is that when you want to keep like beneficials in your area, they're going to go out to untouched areas and they're going to burrow into the ground and they're going to stay over winter there. And then once spring comes, they'll be ready to go. They'll be right next to your tomato plot. But you don't need to have those bugs in your tomato plot necessarily. So it's kind of like a holistic approach to bringing a healthier ecosystem. So you can kind of use whatever you have at your disposal that's still organic for mulching beds and for mulching pots. Usually for like a pot, like a container system, you wouldn't have much of a need for mulching on top of that because it's kind of a small exposed area of soil, and everything below that's not going to need too much management like in the bucket itself or in the container. If you have them in the ground or like in little rows or just little bits, I always love using leaf mulch to mulch everything down. It's free. It rots down really well. We have an asparagus area and a rhubarb area, and we've never applied any fertilizer or compost even once, and they're about 7 years old, full production. And it's because we keep applying leaves every year, really, really thick mat of leaves. That breaks down into basically a fine compost, and then that goes down into the rooting system and gives them their fertilizer. So I would say using mulch that is like no coloring, not bleached, like a natural cedar. At my house, I love using the cedar. It's available at Home Depot, so it's really easy to just grab bags of it. Some people will go through the effort of like gathering their own leaves and then using that as mulch. That's great. You can absolutely do that. So it's really I always recommend people to use what the resources are most available and free. I never want people going out spending hundreds of dollars on something that they can get for free. So if you have wood chips, use that. If you have sawdust, use that. Um, as long as it's like a good organic matter without too many additives, I would say that, it's up to your own creativity.
Okay, awesome. And that would kind of like keep the soil, everything stays inside the soil and lets the organisms kind of do their work, basically. So a
Yeah,
lot of this seems to be like using the natural systems that already exist and kind of helping them.
yeah, for sure. But also the kind of like uh, the the delineation of like if you have like a nice square plot and it's just vegetables, there's nothing else in there, but the entire area around it is wildflowers, it's untouched, there's all types of stuff. That's great. You don't need to do anything to the actual growing plot because nearby are all the good guys.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
And do you like, so when people have like, let's say a worm bin or a compost pile,
Oh
that
yeah.
would kind of end up being somewhere where the bugs would hibernate? Was that what you said?
Kind of. So I would say that getting yourself a nice compost pile, I would say compost is hard to mess up. You're basically making a pile of stuff and letting it rot. So you can make it go faster or slower, but it's pretty hard to mess up. So compost pile, one spot, nice big pile. You can turn it to keep it rotting down, but the rest of like your property, you want to have that in like a nice wild buffer conservant like conserved area. But like the compost, you want to have it just one spot, let that rot down because you're going to need like a good amount of mass to get heat for it to rot down. If you just throw scraps out in the buffer, you'll start having insect and pathogen problems and maybe even some raccoons visiting you.
Right, right. So you do want to like cover it with stuff that's not hold on a second, sorry. That's not really part of that. Like uh that's not rotting food. So you don't want the rotting
Yeah.
food exposed, which actually we saw there's like a public compost pile
Mhm.
down on the other side of Staten Island where they just leave the rotting food on top. And we passed by that and it's like it smells weird and
It's
I'm
pretty
sure that
bad.
the
Yeah.
raccoons are there too and stuff like that. It kind of defeats its own purpose.
Yeah, so we're in our area, we're blessed with like a great leaf drop program. There's so many trees around here, and there's so many leaves that go through like the street sweeping program. The municipalities or like the I guess the contractors that do the street sweeping, they have to go and pay a tipping fee to drop off at municipalities. So you can contact those companies directly, and instead of going there, they'll go right to your property and drop off all the leaves that they swept up. So that obviously comes with some trash that you would need to pick out. So we do a lot of trash picking through here. But those leaves that I was saying that are good for mulch, you can layer those with your compost. So you put a big bucket of scraps and then you just cover that with leaf mulch. That'll take care of the flies. It should, the raccoons are pretty smart, so they might still get in there, but it'll keep the smell down. It'll keep the maggots down. So putting like we call it like a green layer and a brown layer, like lasagna over and over. The green layer being like the food waste, and then the brown layer being either wood chips or leaves or sawdust or something.
No, that makes sense. Okay. And yeah, so when you're talking about compost, you said you can actually contact like a garden company, like a company that does like landscaping. Is that what you meant?
It's like the big trucks that go around and then they have huge vacuums that suck all the leaves up off the side of the street where people rake them out there. So that's like a municipal like service, but the people that are doing that, they you can contact them like that, like whatever tree vacuum leaf company is in your area or in your township or municipality, you can get in contact with them and have an arrangement where the drivers will pinpoint your property to dump instead of municipality or instead of the yard where they have to pay a fee. So they're getting out of a fee, you're getting free organic matter.
Right, right. Okay, cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
because we were actually I had just spoken with the Department of Sanitation this morning about their composting regulations and all of that stuff that they're doing. And they were mentioning that like companies that gather leaves and do all that kind of stuff do have to pay to bring their compost to them, and then they pay to get compost from the compost
Yes.
place here in New York City. Whereas a resident doesn't, isn't going to bring that kind of stuff. Like they're not going to bring leaves, but they can go and pick up compost for free. So if you live here, you can get the
Oh,
compost for free
well,
too.
that's fantastic. I mean, that's a good sidestep. So I would say that like, a lot of there's two kind of like lanes of thought with compost. One is that you're creating your fertilizer and your plant nutrients, but the other more obvious one is that you're just taking care of your food waste. So if you have like a source of free compost, then go use that. Like don't wait for your stuff because your own food waste usually is not going to amount to enough of what your plants need back on that footprint. So I would always recommend if you have a free compost source, like by all means go and do that. But you can still do your compost pile because it's still a good way of dealing with your food waste.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, and they have like giveaways all over in all the five boroughs.
Well, it's
So we'll
fantastic. I
put
love
that
that.
information for residents for them to be able to go get them. And like he definitely said it's free if you're a
Hmm.
resident. If you're a business, you do have to pay for it, but
That's great. I
um
mean, not a lot of communities have that. I would say whoever's organizing that, give them a big high five. That's great.
okay, awesome. And so what plants work well in terms of like what you would want to most plant if you're in like let's say New York City, Staten Island, that are not only just native plants, but that will also bring about the most change for the environment. For example, blueberries will attract every bee, including the specific bees and the I forget what the other thing is where they're able to have anything because there are some bees that will only eat blueberries, but there are some bees that will eat everything, including
Hmm.
blueberries. So like hummingbirds and other pollinators can be brought back by blueberries also. Oak trees and milkweed pods. How do you create an environment that bees, caterpillars, butterflies, and other bugs will return to in preference to other places to kind of build your own ecosystem?
Oh yeah, great question. That's a big one. So I would say, um, you know, starting off kind of like frame of thought again, like when we talked about like our production or our growing area versus like our buffer space, your buffer space is more than enough to have a great effect on the ecosystem. So again, any land or any footprint of land that you can't use or are not using for your production or for your veggies or your grains or whatever can go to what we call a beneficial habitat. And so the best way to keep those going without like breaking your back and spending all of your money is to put in native perennial flowers. And if you could find ones that are really early blooming or really late blooming, that's going to have the best impact and benefit on your pollinators because the mid season is already covered. Everything grows in June, July, August. There's nothing that you necessarily need to put into the world that isn't already there doing its work for the pollinators. So I've always recommended for like honeybees, for different pollinator insects, getting them an earlier start with a good nectar source. So like different mustards, dogwood trees, I think even like tulips and irises are early enough. Really focusing on the early, and then don't worry about the mid season, and then stuff that will bloom late, like goldenrod, different types of asters. I forget what kind of trees are blooming late. I don't think many are going too late into the season. They're starting to go dormant. Um, but looking for those like the perennials will make sure that you don't have to go out and plant them all the time. And then like we talked about this carbon sequestration, that's really good for the air and for the environment. And then making sure that it's a good flowering plant so that there's a food source. So just covering the ground isn't necessarily doing the work for you. And it also depends on which animals you want. So like a hunter will go and make a food plot. They'll plant sorghum, alfalfa, grains and stuff. If you're looking for insects and birds and stuff, you're going to focus on really those flowers and driving that uh, insect ecosystem so that all the birds and bats and everything can feed off of that.
Awesome.
Milkweed's a great one.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, and I know milkweeds like there are I saw the other day someone is a milk pod resting station or something like that. So they have like all these milkweeds and they're a part of some program with a sign.
For the
Um,
monarchs.
what's that? Yeah, for the
But
monarchs.
yeah, that's great. Yeah. So, but also, again, you just got to be careful with keeping your growing space as the growing space because milkweed, some of those types, they actually grow in a rhizome underground and they can be just as like overwhelmingly detrimental as like Canada thistle or quackgrass or Johnson wheat. So, um, like bamboo is the best example. People, it's beautiful, it shades out, and then it takes over your whole ecosystem. So like milkweed and a few other things do have the potential for that. So be careful.
Right, right. And when we're talking about regenerative agriculture and the food systems and desertification and all of that stuff, how does regenerative agriculture kind of play into preventing some of those negative impacts that conventional farming has brought?
Well, I would say that even though just the term regenerative doesn't have necessarily the rules, the overall feeling is that like we are caring, like we're here to care, like this is going to be a farm that's going to put significant effort into not just yields and cranking out one crop, but really taking like a holistic approach to what they're doing, managing their little hill that they put their flag on. That's what I. So like it's regenerative organic has very strict rules, but regenerative is more of like a movement of like, hey, we want things to be better, and doesn't necessarily have like a step by step one, two, three. This is how you do it. But regardless of who's saying the word regenerative, it's showing a movement of humanity towards caring more about where their food comes from and the impact that creating their food has on the earth. So, I would say there's a lot of different places on the river people put their boat with regenerative, like they care about this thing or this topic's more important to them, and regenerative covers a lot of stuff. But I would say overall it's really just this philosophy that we're going to build up what we've been given, this earth.
Okay, cool. And one question that I kept coming back to while I was watching those films, is I know how to find organic products, you know how to find non-GMO. How do you find either regenerative organic products in the store or regenerative products, and how do you know that they're actually regenerative?
Great question. So I feel like we've been circling, and now we're here. So regenerative agriculture does not have any substance behind it necessarily. Legally, a consumer can see the word regenerative, and that word wouldn't have anything behind it. So a lot of times when people are going to certify organic or regenerative organic, it's usually because they're not face to face with their customer. If I'm the farmer and I meet my customers every week and I know them by name, they know what I'm doing, they trust me, they're going to pay that higher dollar value, that organic price point, even if I'm not certified. When people are on a larger scale, when they're not meeting their customer face to face, if they're doing wholesale, you really need a stamp or some type of certification that's going to prove that your farmers or you as a farmer are following the rules and the customer is getting what they're expecting. So organic and regenerative organic both have that substance behind them. And regenerative organic has its own label. The Regenerative Organic Alliance certifies regenerative organic or rock certified. So I think that we're looking for regenerative organic certified trademarked. So they have their own emblem and everything. So that's what they'll be looking for stamp wise. Products are available online, so you can do some online shopping. I think that stores are still coming around to having some products. I believe Whole Foods does carry regenerative organic products, but with a big change in the market, it's going to be a slow change. But we do see, the paradigm has switched. We do see people moving in that direction.
So does that kind of indicate that sometimes people are buying regenerative agriculture stuff that's not regenerative organic and they don't know it and they're just kind of contributing and they're just like it's just random? Like there's a product that they might get that happened to be grown that way, whereas there's no actual seal on it.
Yeah, that's certainly possible. So I would say that, unfortunately, there's plenty of greenwashing and whitewashing, and whatever term you want to use for someone that's going to use a word without having a substance behind it. So, nobody wants to like cover the world in red tape, but when you have actual rule set, a certification, an audit, a third party audit at that, you really know that that stamp means something. So the organic stamp really means something. The regenerative organic stamp really means something, and there's other certifications too. It's not just those two. But when you have like a word like all natural or regenerative, and there's nobody making the rules or holding people accountable for the rules, then yeah, you can be tricked by marketing there.
Right, right. And yeah, like you were saying, like natural. A lot of people think natural means something, but it doesn't actually mean anything at
No,
all.
it doesn't.
It just is like a feel-good word.
Yeah, and
Um,
local is also starting to suffer from that too. We're starting to see that local for some people means within the domestic US.
okay. Which is not what people think that it means for sure.
Yeah.
Um, and and I'm just curious if you happen to know, if you have we've been having a lot of storms here lately, and a lot of tree limbs have been getting ripped off because
Mm.
they're suffering from drought first. Are there ways using regenerative agriculture to make tree limbs stronger, or is that not really something that we know how to do yet?
Well, I mean, so there wouldn't be like a here's the magic pill to make them stronger, but if we kind of break down the organic like techniques, then this is going to be something that absolutely can do that. So basically, when we build up the soil with compost or manure or carbon sequestration and get it to a really healthy state, that immediately means that we're having healthier plants. They have all of the nutrients they need. They're in a good growing zone. That lets them build up their normal defense structures, their normal support structures. If there's not, you know, if it's not overrun with weeds, then they can, do the normal growth pattern instead of growing up too quickly. But at the same time, some trees just go down. A big storm comes through, and it's a bit of the natural order. So, love to have more trees staying there, but sometimes like a 20-year storm. Oh, I'm so sorry. Sometimes like a 20-year storm is going to come through and wreck stuff. So I've been doing this since 2011 for different farmer, and in 2018, 7 years into my career in farming, we saw floods that crippled areas. It put people out of business. It completely removed the soil from their farms in some areas, and we haven't seen that since. So um, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, there's longer cycles in order here where maybe one year a lot of trees go down. But if you stick to organic methods and you build up soil and you think of soil as a living thing, or even as a crop, if you want to think of it as a crop itself, it needs its inputs. It needs to be paid attention to. And if you do that, your trees, all of your crops will come out healthier and stronger.
Awesome. Okay. And I know like one of the things that we were noticing a few days ago when we had 106-degree weather,
That's
which was
brutal. Yeah.
very weird, that I've never seen this before, where the trees were all shedding their bark. Like there were
Oh,
literal
wow.
piles of bark on all around the trees, and they looked like they were shaved, like an animal gets shaved, like it has like pieces like missing from its
Wow.
bark, which would be like fur. But then what ended up happening was it was a good thing we had like 3 inches of rain. So, because a lot of times what ends up happening is that they're not just getting overheated, and then there's not enough water, and then everything shrinks and expands. And like 106 degrees was really rare, and it was 3 days in a row, so it really did a lot of damage. But because it rained so much, it seems like they've all recovered at this point. So hopefully they won't die, because that's also a possibility when that kind of thing happens to them. Um,
Wow.
so the next couple of questions would be more specific, relating to how regenerative agriculture might be able to help with certain undesirable things. So in terms of poison ivy and what would be either regenerative agricultural control of it or non-chemical control. So like maybe you could smother it all in compost. I don't know. Maybe that's a
Mhm.
possibility.
So, again, sometimes the answers make sense in theory, and then logistically, they they don't hold any water. But one thing that people do that is an all-time crowd favorite is bringing goats out and having them absolutely wreck all the poison ivy. They love it.
So you had just started talking about the poison ivy.
Yeah. So I was talking about that bringing goats through is definitely one of people's favorite because it's like one of those. Uh, it really immediately connects the dots, like with the regenerative and holistic approach, where it's like, oh, we have this livestock animal taking care of a pest on our property, not using chemicals, not even having a human input, just putting goats out there. With that being said, not every municipality wants goats like roaming around, um, and they can also tear up good things. So like if there's like new trees, goats are very curious. They'll eat just about everything. So um, they would need to be like managed daily by someone. They can just like let them out there. So aside from that, It's not everyone's favorite, but going in there and ripping the plants out is really the like surefire regenerative way to make sure that you're killing it without using chemicals. Some people will also just kind of resort like kind of like long term starving it out. So basically, like you have a bunch of trees, there's a bunch of vines going up there. They'll cut out a chunk on each of the vines so that the vines on the tree no longer have a connection to the ground. So they'll eventually die off. They'll like lose their grip and they're very easily to pull down or like a storm will knock them down. As the roots try to send new ones up, send new shoots up, someone would have to go through and continue to manage those. So that didn't happen. And eventually both sides starve out and die. But that's going to be a long-term approach. It's going to be several years of managing it that way.
Okay. So when you see like poison ivy that's on the ground, which in the Staten Island woods here, that's mostly where it grows, is like on the grounds and on the trail and stuff like that. So is it that there's a tree nearby that it needs to live on, like, or is it like a separate system, the ones on the ground to the ones on the tree?
The poison ivy is going to try to gain as much height as it can. So if there's nothing around it to climb on, it'll continue to grow on the ground and like branch up as much as it can, but it won't usually get more than like hip high without a structure for it to climb on. On trails, uh, that's a good question. I would say a lot of people are going to be kind of like mowing and hacking back like wherever the poison ivy is. If it's just a few spots where it's like encroaching, going in and ripping it out by hand with just like long sleeves and pants on might be a good idea. If it's really taken over a whole area of like wooded land and not necessarily like lawn space, that would be kind of tough to manage. I would think that, yeah, that would be because it's going to keep coming back. And if you can't till it or you can't disturb the soil to kill the roots, because it's coming back from the roots, um, maybe in the wooded areas, if you can get livestock out there to tear it up, but then in like more open areas, ripping it out by hand, maybe. It's kind of tough. It really depends on the terrain, how bad the poison ivy is, how old it is. But a lot of times it would, like I said, it'll grow up trees because it can get more height and more light that way.
Okay, okay, that makes sense. And when you say livestock, do deer eat poison ivy?
That is a great question. I don't think I've ever seen deer eat poison ivy. No, I can't. No, I don't think they do.
Okay. Because we
I
had
know
seen
goats do.
a couple of deer eating the lower poison ivy leaves on a tree
Okay.
in the woods. So I was just curious to know if they actually would eat it a lot because maybe they're just eating the non-shiny leaves or something.
Hmm.
But it's interesting that you say goats and do cows eat poison ivy or is that just goats mostly?
Yeah, goats are really the ones that they're really built to like browse on really like rough forage. Like they specifically do not want to be like pastured through a field like sheep or cows. And then sheep and cows, they have a very sensitive kind of gut biome. So you have to like be very hands-on with what forage they're eating. Goats will I've seen goats eat nails and umbrellas and like fence posts. Like they're unstoppable.
Okay, that makes sense. And then when it comes to potato blight, which is an oomycete, how would this organism be controlled without chemicals? So, like, for example, some research has shown that crop rotation with legumes is very effective, but maybe like co-planting would help because what they've been finding is that if you the cycle is a multi-year cycle. So if you break the cycle with something else, then that's like an easy way to fix it without chemicals.
Mhm.
So, if I don't know if you're familiar with potato blight and how people can fix that with like regenerative.
Yeah, so we get quite a bit of blight, and we deal with that in many different ways. So in my program, I show the students several different systems that are side by side. So we see the heavy input system, we see the no input system, we see the tillage system, no tillage system. And so what I know is that when you have basically when you harvest the crop, just because of human efficiency, you can't remove every single potato out of that field. You're going to leave some, or some are going to be behind. Um, you can't get rid of all of them. So those potatoes, likely while they were growing, received a spore blowing in on the wind. So usually these blights are going to come in on storms, usually from southern U.S. up on tropical storms. They're going to infect the potatoes, and then the potatoes will still yield and survive. and whatever's left over in the soil will still have that pathogen. So if you go back the next year and you plant potatoes on top of that, as soon as those potatoes are growing, they're immediately going to get the pathogen from last year's potatoes. So in the organic certification, you have to have a minimum of a 3 crop rotation. So that's going to reduce the need for more pathogen or for more pesticides because you don't have as many pathogens because you're rotating. So I recommend that for anybody and everybody. It's always going to be easier to not plant the same thing over and over in the same spot. Um, sorry, can you repeat your question one more time? The potato blight. So we when you have something that's going to be blowing in on spores on storms, there's the companion planting isn't going to stop that from happening. And what we usually see with companion planting of different beneficials, it's really targeted at insects. So there's rarely like a trap crop system or a companion plant system that's going to have a noticeable effect on pathogens and viruses and bacteria, fungus, stuff like that, because it's just they're so small, they blow in on the wind. It's not like a matter of them seeking out the plant. It's just they cover everything. So when I think about dealing with blight, and dealing with any type of fungus or pathogen, the number one thing you can do besides applying the fungicides and pesticides is to maximize airflow for your crop or for whatever it is that you're concerned with. So that means not planting too densely and allowing air to kind of tumble and flow through the canopy of whatever plant you're using. So that's going to keep down the possibility of those spores germinating and infecting the plant. So culturally, spreading plants out, giving them lots of airflow is one way to reduce it. But like I said, you can't stop the storms, and the storms have the spores on them, and they cover everything. So a lot of people are going to either try to use a variety that's a quick variety to yield so they can outrace the pathogen, or they're going to resort to organic pesticides and fungicides, which we do use here.
Okay, cool. Um, and then when it comes to like organic pesticides and stuff like that, what kind of options or herbicides or pesticides to control like blights, to control herbs, I mean like weeds and stuff like that? What do you guys usually use?
So organic, that's a great question. So organic pesticides, this to speak broadly, they're going to be derived from a natural source. So either from a microbe, a flower, an oil of some sort. So it's going to come from nature in some way. A lot of conventional ones are derivatives of byproducts from pharmaceutical companies, from processing and manufacturing companies, where these chemicals are waste products that are now being used for agriculture. In the organic system, there are no like real what we would call systemic pesticides, which means that the plant cannot absorb what we're spraying. So, for instance, herbicides, basically every herbicide that exists is a systemic chemical, which means that it goes into the plant, it has an effect on the plant, and persists inside the plant. So, when we have organics, the chemicals can't go inside, they just lay on top. And what that means for us is that that's a weaker molecule or it's a weaker application. It has less persistence, less effect. So we end up having to spray it a little bit more frequently. So it's kind of this, people wouldn't expect that to be the case. They think less spraying, but because they're derived from a natural source, because they're not as strong and persistent as conventional molecules, you have to reapply it more frequently. And so we're using things like pyrethrins that are derived from chrysanthemum flowers. We're using things like a spinosad derived from a soil microbe. Different types of potassium fatty acids are approved. We use oxidate, which is like a peroxide that we apply to the plants to kill off some of the funguses. There's different copper powders that are approved for organic application, and a lot of it, the checklist for organic chemicals is focused on both human health and ecological health. So some of the fertilizers that are not allowed to be used in organic don't necessarily have a negative human effect, but if misused or not properly used, could have an effect on the ecosystem, and therefore they're restricted or they're banned.
Got it. Okay. And yeah, because we were also going to, I was also going to ask you about chestnut blight, which is actually, it's not something you're very familiar with, but it is
Right.
similar to the potato blight, except for one really big part of the issue is that it grows stories up off the ground. So like the chestnut blight will hit a tree limb that's 30 or 40 feet up, and where you might apply in the potato blight instance, you might spray on something, you can't reach it. Like it's
Yeah.
not going to happen. I mean, there's no, you'd have to climb the tree.
And if I could ask a quick clarifying question, I did some work in school on fire blight and apples, and they make cankers. Is that same thing with so then
Exactly.
they're almost untouchable because they've gotten the plant to heal and protect them. So the only thing you could do chemically for that is a systemic pesticide, and that, you know, a lot of times even that's not going to be enough. Sometimes the problem is so far advanced that you just have to get rid of the tree and start over.
Right, because that's ended up, we used to have in America, there used to be millions of American chestnut trees. And what ends up happening is that this blight comes on one of the limbs, it encirculates the limb, then it encirculates the trunk, and then the tree is dead. But then
Mm,
it keeps trying to come back. Like the roots are alive, so it keeps on growing up, and then the same thing happens. And then it grows up. And because for whatever reason, that particular tree likes to be the top tree in the forest. It is the tallest tree around so that it can get all the
mm.
light, I guess. But
Yeah, probably.
that actually became its fatal flaw in that it needs to do that because when they brought the chestnut blight over from China, the Chinese chestnuts,
Yeah.
there was no protection against it. We're down to, I think they said we went from 2.5 million trees in the 1940s to 10,000 now. And there's the American Chestnut Foundation who we had spoken to, who is trying to use a GMO kind of like natural GMO kind of like plant breeding
Yes,
for
that's what I was going to
resistance.
speak on. Yeah,
So
so plant breeding is going to be one of those, you know, like those big solutions that has a very good long-term impact, but it takes a while to get there. Here on this property, we're actually trying out different hazelnut varieties that are not going to get the blight. And I thought, you know, I can't remember if we planted chestnuts or walnuts. I want to say it's chestnuts and looking at different hybrids. When we talk about breeding programs and hybridization or even grafting, we want to make sure that we like keep in mind the delineation between a genetically modified organism that has been with a machine and with human intervention changed its genome unnaturally. But when we have things that we breed through sexual reproduction of pollination, that's going to be a natural way of doing it, totally fine, no GMOs whatsoever. And then grafting onto a rootstock, that's just physically attaching things. There's no migration of DNA. There's no kind of combining of the two plants on a gene level, just physically. And so grafting is okay and breeding is okay. But what we want to avoid in organic is that genetically modified organism that was, you know, used with like a CRISPR program to change the genes with a computer.
right, right, right. Yeah, we're like sometimes humans would wish that we had that same capacity to you just graft a new limb on and it'll just grow
I
right
think about it
through.
all the time. Yeah, just a few tools on the back that I can use. That'd be great.
So, and one question that I wanted to ask, and this might be a little bit specific, is it possible to know from the symptoms that a plant is exhibiting whether it's suffering from chemical contaminants of any kind, whether it's pesticides, herbicides, or fungicides that were misapplied or that have damaged it, versus disease such as blight or bacteria or even underwatering? Like, how would you determine that without expensive tests?
So a lot of that, you know, it'll come from a combination of your experience with the plants that you're looking at and then knowledge of what has been going on around you because the symptoms are so similar. It's either going to turn yellow, purple, brown, it's going to wilt, or it's going to grow too fast. Like there's only like 12 things that a plant can do to experience that demonstrate any type of symptom. So a lot of times when you see, I guess before I step into that, when we see herbicide damage, it's very obvious because the plant is a plant. So the herbicide's meant to kill the plants. So we're going to see immediate damage on that plant. Fungicides and insecticides are only meant to kill the bugs or the pathogens, and they usually do not have any effect on the plant. So when we look at one that's been sprayed with even like the most intense insecticide you can get on the market, it would be hard to look at that plant and say, oh, this has had this type of insecticide. There's almost no symptoms. So with the herbicide, when people are like maybe they apply it to a lawn to kill all the clover and weeds, but you have trees nearby, If it drifts over to those trees, you'll see points of damage on those leaves. And so usually it's not enough to kill the whole plant. If it's small, perhaps, but you're going to see what looks like yellowing spots, some leaves dying just on like one side of the plant. So a lot of times it's not going to have like a massive effect and kill everything. When we do, so we have plots here where we look at the difference of conventional and organic agriculture side by side. And so I managed those plots for 3 years, and I've sprayed plenty of conventional herbicides on those plots. They have a very uh, right where I stop spraying, the exact line is where I stop seeing the damage. And if the wind blows while I'm doing that, I can see in the grass that little blip, like that little curve from when the wind blew. And so if you see basically a whole area that has been obviously applied with herbicide, all of the broadleaves are dying, but all the grasses are still there, and you see burn marks on the landscaping around, or like little spots or little where the tissue is dying, really good chance that was herbicide drifting over to that. But again, aside from those like really general symptoms, it's hard to know exactly what's happening with the plant without bringing on a consultant or sending out tests and stuff like that.
Um, so basically, if somebody was to see something that looks like symptoms of herbicide damage, but let's say they have like four different plants in the pot, like they have like lady's thumb, dandelion, lamb's quarters, which two of those are weeds. So you would expect that they would be affected, but only one of them is affected. Would that kind of be an indication that it is an herbicide or it was just applied to one spot?
All right, so I would say basically the way it works, you have three categories of herbicide. You have burn down, pre-emergent, and post-emergent. A burn down is going to be an herbicide that kills everything that it touches, no matter what it touches. So that's glyphosate and that's Roundup. So most people are applying glyphosate, and that is going to have the same effect on every single plant that it touches. So if you see a group of plants and only like two or three of them have these symptoms, it was unlikely to be a broad spectrum like herbicide like Roundup. Um, the other herbicides, the post and pre-emergent, they're going to have different effects on grasses versus broadleaves. So in the scientific world, we call them monocots and dicots. And so it's kind of like the chemicals that were, you know, used in like, Vietnam, like Agent Orange and stuff like that. They've been modified and manipulated for use for at-home growers. And basically it's people who want a lawn with nothing else in it. They just want that perfect grass lawn. And so you can, for a grain crop or for corn or for a lawn, you apply these specific herbicides, and they're going to kill all the broadleaves and keep all of the grasses. So if you see that, really good chance that that's also an herbicide. Um, but it wouldn't have any effect on like if you had corn or something like that. But if you're saying there's like a bunch of containers, and just like in the group of containers, a few of them look like they have it, if they're on the edge of that group, then perhaps that was an herbicide drift. If they're just randomly spotted through there, it might not be herbicide.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Yes. So, and is that something that like if you guys had a suspicion that someone had come and sprayed herbicide on one of the plots of land that you guys are using, how would you find out? Like, how would you test for that? Like, how would you determine that if that was like something you were suspecting?
You can take a soil sample and send it to a lab. So you would basically find a lab that offers that type of service. So not every lab's going to have the same type of testing equipment. So you'd find someone that can test for those types of contaminants. And I'll say from my experience of like just looking it up, not having sent it in, they're very expensive. So you wouldn't want to like get 100 samples and send those off. That'll cost you quite a bit of money. But you can by all means take a sample and then have somebody analyze it saying, I want to look for, I guess you would want, yeah, it would be tough because they're not going to have necessarily a test that's going to give you, oh, this is the brand or this is the chemical that they used. It would be more like, hey, I suspect this. Can you test for this? And they would say, yes, this is present or no. So I guess a little bit of background of trying to find out what they're using, or giving the lab just a list of herbicides that you know are available in the market and seeing if any of them show up.
Right, right. And but when you do that, then they're like, because I know some of the labs that I had spoken to years ago, they only test for one thing. So each test is like $400 for like one separate thing. So like if you made them a list of like five different herbicides you think it could be, then it would be like very expensive.
Yeah, that sounds about
So
right to me.
so it would be the most helpful to kind of understand, at least in regards to like contaminations and stuff like that, that if you're seeing a container where only a few things interspersed with it are having this effect, what else could have an effect that would look like an herbicide? Would it be a bacteria or a fungus or something like that? Because, and I'm specifically talking about like twisting, like
Mhm.
that twisting that plants do. So, like, let's say that you see a group of plants like the lady's thumb, and it's next to dandelions, and the dandelions look like they have some fungus on them, and the lady's thumbs look like they're twisting up like an herbicide, but the lamb's quarters is doing nothing.
Hmm.
What would be like, what would be an explanation for that kind of thing?
Well, it could be. I would not think that lamb's quarter would have any special resistance. It's rather common annual plant that dies pretty quickly. And you said dandelion and pink lady's thumb, and they got all this crazy twisted growth.
Yes. And the dandelions seem just like they have fungus on them. Some, mostly they're unaffected, but like, and this has actually been going on for a while. So it's something that we're trying to figure out what it could possibly be without having to pay for all of these tests. Because
Yeah.
like, the suspicion is that maybe there was an herbicide drift from our neighbor's yard, our neighbor's landscaper, or something like that. But from what you're saying, like it would have like delineations and stuff like that. So do funguses look like herbicide damage, or is there bacterias that look like that? Like, are these something that is common to happen to plants? Like the same thing happens to this plant, no matter what of the pathogens or chemicals are applied to it, or is that like not the case?
No, I would say that it's pretty close to what I would say. So it's like I said, there's only a few ways, a few like behaviors that we can observe in a plant. And so when we spray one of our conventional plots with an herbicide, it looks like early on that the plant has not been watered properly. And then it starts to kind of yellow and brown and then eventually completely dies off 100%. And so, like when that's happening, unless you knew you sprayed that with herbicide, you'd be like, oh my gosh, I need to increase water. I forgot my nutrients or I didn't cultivate right. There's something terrible going on. There's like until you like sit there and like look at your system, like, oh, I sprayed herbicide here. That's why I was doing that. Like the herbicide symptoms are not different from plant nutrient deficiencies or from pathogens. And there are very specific markers for certain pathogens, like a blight. You get like a little lesion, you turn the leaf over, it's fuzzy on the other side, that's blight. So like there's specific things you can look at for specific infections, but there's plenty of things where it's like like a good example is bacterial wilt. It's a bacteria that lives in a cucumber gut. When a cucumber bites your cucumber plant, it releases that bacteria, then the whole plant wilts just out of like almost out of nowhere, like it's not being watered. And so like unless you knew that that bug has been there, or you're like super sure that you watered them and all the other plants look good, but this one plant is going down hard, that's bacterial wilt. So a lot of times a plant dies and we're like, what just happened? And then we have to go back and think about like, all right, what did I do? What was the season like? Taking lots of notes is a good way to go back and try to recognize those things. But if you're in an area where you're sure they're spraying herbicide and you see a few plants on the edge of your plot that have herbicide symptoms, really good chance it's herbicide.
All right, cool. And what you had said before about herbicide is that there's a progression for herbicide that's kind of universal for all of the plants. So like they'll start with the twisting and then they'll get the yellowing and the browning and then they'll die. Is that like what
Um,
most herbicides do?
Not necessarily. So there's different modes of actions for the herbicides. So like a glyphosate is going to interrupt the amino acid process or the production within the plant. So like the whole plant just starts to tank. Um, that needs to be applied to the leaves. There's other ones like atrazine and other herbicides out there, and they need to be like absorbed through the roots, and they need to go through and disturb another part of the system. So you would see different symptoms from that, but ultimately the plant would die. Some herbicides, they kind of like the plant continues to like a mustard plant. It's in its leaf form. You apply the herbicide, the bottom leaves start to die, and the plant keeps making new leaves on top, and they start to die and they die and they die, and eventually it catches up and the whole plant dies. But that's like a very obvious difference from spraying clover that immediately just tanks like right away. So uh, different symptoms because of the different plant structures.
Right, right. And when you talk about like organic gardening and stuff like that, how long, if somebody sprayed an herbicide in the soil and the plants are gone, like the plants died, and you planted new plants there, is that soil still contaminated and can cause those new plants to die?
There are, from what we see in research, there is support that there's persistent chemicals from those herbicide applications. So glyphosate is found several years after application. For the organic process to get as close to good as possible, we require 3 years of no prohibited substance. So from our standpoint, by the books, we say give it 3 years before you start doing anything in there. But you the herbicide won't be at a level or in a volume that's going to have an effect on next year's plant. So if I burn down herbicide spray 1 year, then next year I can plant tomatoes or pumpkins or whatever. It's not going to have an effect on it then.
Okay, so that's really important to this question that I have. So if you're seeing this kind of damage and you didn't do it this year and it's coming back year to year, then it's probably some kind of pathogen rather than the pesticide being in the soil causing this kind of damage.
Yes, but there are persistent herbicides where it's like you instead of a spray, it's like a powder or a granule, and then that has like a slow like a long-term release. And so if someone wanted to, I forget exactly how long they last, but you can put down an herbicide that lasts for a very long time, and continues to like block things in that area. Glyphosate and some of the more popular ones are not that persistent. The chemicals and like some of the compounds are persistent in the soil and can have a negative effect on humans, says the research, but the effect on the plant production, it won't have that effect.
Okay, that's now one of the other things that I wanted to ask that I know I didn't write this in there, so just thinking of it now.
Yeah.
What would you tell people are some of the reasons to not use um, chemicals, whether they're pesticides or herbicides, or fungicides might be acceptable. I'm not sure like what your philosophy is of your organization. Like, why would you not want to use these chemicals? How they damage the plants, that's one thing. We know they kill the plants and stuff. But how do they affect humans? And how do they affect humans long term?
Yeah, so each and every single input in the organic certification goes through kind of an audit process where a certifier or the OMRI kind of board is going to look through research, and they're going to see what compounds exist in this product, what are the other compounds or byproducts that are inside of there still. Does it, one, have a negative effect on humans in any health way? And does it have a negative effect on the ecosystem in any way? So those are two questions that are asked for every single chemical that goes into the certificate into organic production. So there are no systemic pesticides or chemicals available in organic. It's not allowed. And so anything with an organic symbol on it will not have any chemicals inside of that fruit the way a conventional one will. So you go to the stores, we know that inside of like the rinds and everything, some of those fungicides and some of those insecticides. So in an organic system, we do have insecticides and we do have fungicides, but they're not persistent and they're not systemic, which is very, very important. So they can be washed off very easily. Um, with that big delineation between organic and conventional, like I said, whatever's within that organic system can be used responsibly to avoid, the same negative effects that we see from like Roundup, where we see the lawsuits of uh, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma from continued application and use of it. So the chemicals that we're using go through like a board approval, we'll say, and it's based off of human health and ecosystem health.
Okay, cool. And as far as like ecosystems, I know that there was in the Kiss the Ground was there was a scientist who was like, "Oh, I decided to research glyphosate on bees," and then they destroyed his career. However, now if you look at it, once he opened that door, the door kind of like opened. And now that became an avenue to explore. And there's actually been a lot of evidence coming out that those kinds of chemicals are harming the bees, the butterflies, and other sensitive organisms, and they might have been contributing to colony collapse disorder. So when it comes to herbicides, pesticides, and persistent chemicals, what does that do to an ecosystem? Like you want the mycelium, you want the bacteria underground. So what do these things do to basically make what you want not happen?
I mean, basically they create imbalance. So if we think about, food chain or the food web, everything's connected to each other. So if you have a drop in one area, so a certain insect no longer is around, now that might have been a food source. Now that whatever was eating that isn't going to have its food source. That might have been a pollinator. Now whatever plant was relying on the pollination isn't going to get that. Every single piece is connected. So as soon as you start kind of meddling or applying something to disrupt that, um, that's the effect it's going to have. So you're going to have population booms of pests. You're going to have population booms of maybe predators or parasites. It becomes imbalance. And I'll say that, nature isn't balanced in a way that's perfect for us to produce. So it's not like we can just prance out into the field and let nature take care of it. It'll consume what we're doing. It'll destroy it. Around here, everything wants to go back to a forest, constantly fighting to keep the perennial weeds out of our production area. So it's, really a kind of a matter of, I don't know, I want to say more like a, no, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit lost here.
That's okay.
Yeah, remind me again that what we were, the
So
question.
yeah, talking about like how these chemicals affect the
Oh,
ecosystems in a
right, right.
broader sense.
Yeah. So, and a lot of what we do with our systems is still being cognizant of the rest of our property. So if I have a creek going through my property, I'm not planting up to the creek. I'm giving it a good riparian zone, and then I'm treating that riparian zone different from the rest of my field. I won't be spraying it. I won't be tilling there. I might even put some beneficial plants in there that I wouldn't want in my production area.
Right, right. And so you were mentioning uh, fighting the forest, right? One of the biggest guns the forest has is mulberry trees. I don't know if you guys have those over there.
Tons everywhere.
Oh my
Oh yeah.
gosh, that you cannot pull them out. Once they get to a certain point, they're there and you just can cut them down because like I mean maybe if you had a tractor or something, but then all that has to happen is the littlest piece has to be left behind of the root and it will grow a new plant.
Yeah.
And we actually struggle with these too because here in this Staten Island climate, they just keep growing. And
Mhm.
they grow leaves and they're like they shade. And then if you have like you have production stuff, you have to cut it down because it's going to shade your production area.
Mhm.
But you do want to have mulberries for the birds and the bugs. So it's like kind of like this kind of balance of
It
how much
is.
is too much.
Well, it's a perfect balance, and unfortunately, a lot of it's like you give towards one, you're taking from the other. It's hard to build up both at the same time. There's only so many hours in the day, so it's like, well, I'd love to spend 8 hours making this a perfect beneficial area, but I got work and kids, and I got like a lot of stuff to do. So I'm going to do it this way because it's more time uh, efficient. So it is a balance. It's a balance between our deepest philosophies and then the production that we need for farming, at least from my perspective of paying your bills with the crops.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and actually there was one farmer who was featured in all the three of the Groundswell trilogy
Oh yeah.
was and what they said was that he has a regenerative farm and when you compare the profits from a regular conventional farm, so a regular conventional farm, every 100 acres would make $3 or something like that, or it might be 250 acres. I don't remember exactly what amount of acres, but it was $3 versus 100 for farm, which was regenerative. So it's not only good for the environment, but it's also good financially for people. And I don't know if you saw Dune, the DHUN place in India, and what they did with that place, how it was in the groundswell and the kiss the ground. It
Mm,
was a desert, a literal desert in India.
mhm,
And now it's a forest of avocados and berries and fruits and coffee and so
mhm,
many different things. And they're restoring the ecosystem using these principles. So
mhm.
it kind of just can kind of give you an idea of what's possible. And what do you see as going forward for regenerative agriculture, including certifications, how to get more people, more farmers into it, and more consumers interested in it? How does your institute see that is going forward?
Well, so I would say that Rodale kind of stands here as kind of educators and leaders for anybody that wants to take part in the movement or wants to listen or finds uh, these topics concerning. I would say that what's really changing things is money, and it's the money from the consumers that are voting with their food dollars towards systems that are more responsible towards the environment and towards humanity. So that that system needs to be in place the way it is with a higher dollar value because of the difference in production. And so when we look at kind of if I were to take an acre of potatoes and I need a certain amount of nitrogen for that acreage, and I go and I buy urea nice and cheap, I put it in there the exact amount I need. If I try to go and get organic fertilizers to that same amount in the same system, I'll go broke. And so we have other methods of introducing nitrogen fertilizer through cover crops and whatnot, but we still need to give those plants what they need necessarily. And so I'm sorry, can you remind me one more time? I'm getting off topic as
Uh,
towards the end here.
Sure, absolutely. Just kind of going forward.
Going forward.
And this might cut you off, in which case I'll just send another link.
No, it's okay. So I would say, what did I want to say? Lost my thought. Going forward, it's really oh, right, with the different profit margins and whatnot. So you're seeing that more profitability because people are voting with their food dollar, but that system itself couldn't exist unless that price point was higher. So because they're going through and they're using less efficient systems, so like the most efficient system in agriculture, spray the herbicide, plant the corn, harvest the corn, spray the herbicide again, and just go through that. It's very, very efficient. It's a really easy equation. There's more risk and more complexity in an organic system, but it's more responsive.
Yeah, so we were just kind of, you got interrupted. We were talking about kind of what we see as going forward, um, in terms of like regenerative
So
agriculture and stuff like that.
yeah, so we're kind of seeing people voting with their food dollar, really telling us and the corporation and all of the different food companies what people want. And so if you had, you know, the most evil person in charge, they're going to see where the money's going. And if people are spending more money on organic, now organic's the thing. So the same thing with regenerative and regenerative organic. If people are moving towards that, they're willing to spend more money on that, then food companies are going to move towards that. They're going to expand on it. So it's kind of people continuing to voice their opinions, spend money wisely. And I would say that people should really go out and try to support their local farmers. Go out to farmers markets, go to farm stands. It's very convenient to go to grocery stores. So I go to grocery stores, no, really seeing the future of kind of small and medium-sized business owners expand in America with small organic agriculture.
Okay, awesome. So, is there anything else that you wanted to add today?
If you wanted to add a plug for the RIF program, there's lots of good language on our website, farmer training program. We're really dedicated to the business, the science, and the production of being a business owner. So people come through this program and they're ready to go. Some of them even open their businesses while they're enrolled here. Applications are going to open around August. We have a webinar that's going to be up soon on our website. So if you could make any plug for that, I'd totally appreciate it.
Okay, great. Yeah, definitely. If they can send me some details about that, we'll definitely include that in the article too.
Awesome. Will do.
Thank you so much. Have a great day. It was great to meet with you.
Well, it's great meeting you too. Thank you. Have a good one. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.